Another business leader not happy with how level the playing fields are in his sector is Solomon Lew, chairman of Premier Investments, whose Just Group owns clothing brands like Jay Jays, Portmans and Dotti. At issue, the rise of online sales, which at the moment largely escape the GST. I spoke earlier to Solomon Lew about the state of his industry. Solomon Lew, here we are at the end of the year. Looking back, what's been happening with the retail apparel sector and what have been the big influences?
Well, of course, there was a slowdown because of the GFC, and then there was the stimulus package, which helped greatly. But generally, it's all about, how much the consumer has to spend. So, of course, sustenance is their first port of call. And then the rest goes into discretionary spending. So, the fashion and apparel business received their share, but of course they're also competing very heavily against the iPad and the iPhone and just generally there's a lot of money going into other sectors.
You mentioned the rise of electronics. We're hearing this week of fuel bills rising in some cases to perhaps 10% of people's income. Do you worry about essential costs like this rising?
Oh, it's very concerning. The energy costs and interest rates, of course, are very, very concerning to the consumer here in Australia. And I think that the consumer is somewhat spooked at the moment.
Now, you've been very critical of the Reserve Bank. As a former board member yourself, these decisions on interest rates are never easy, are they?
Well, I think that they're a bit ahead of their time, I think that they could have held off. I think that the market is not that overheated. And I think that they're basically gauging the general economy against the mining boom. And the mining boom is something totally separate to the general economy. And if you go out there in just the local suburbs and ask the populace of how they're going, they'll say, well, everything is costing them more money and they're really not earning that much more money. So, the Reserve Bank should be conscious of giving the people a go.
But what you're saying is that the RBA should have held back and relied on government fiscal management.
Without a doubt.
We talked about electronic goods, but of course the other threat in your industry is the rise of online retail, isn't it?
Yes, well, the online situation is growing. And, if the numbers that we're hearing are correct, it's very, very worrying. The numbers currently being put out are that approximately $1 billion a month is going offshore. Now, that $1 billion a month is doing nothing for Australia. There is no Australian suppliers that are involved. There is no Australian labour that's involved. And if the government doesn't do anything about it, you will see that there will be reduced hours that the shopkeepers and their employees will be working. There'll be less manufacturing going on. There'll be less in the logistics and there'll be less in the services. So there's a real fear that this business could grow and it will hurt the Australian economy overall. It's just not retail. And I'm not sure whether the government fully realise, but at this point in time, the laws aren't being policed. You've got the Australia Post, which can bring in up to $1,000, and you've got the couriers that can only have duty-free and GST-free for $250. But that is not being policed. And so therefore you've got small business that are getting up to 5 shipments a day from various channels of distribution 5 times a week. So that there is a massive amount of goods that are coming into Australia that are not being charged GST and not paying any duty. That is a very, very unfair disadvantage to the major players in the industry.
Both yourself and Gerry Harvey have been very vocal about this. It is a difficult area to police. What should government be doing about it?
Well, it's very simple. They have to collect duty and GST at the point of entry. In our organisation, we've got well in excess of 1,000 stores. We are a collector 7 days a week, every minute of the day, of GST on behalf of the government. And we pay duty at the point of entry. So it's very simple. There are basically 5 or 6 points of entry into Australia, being the freight forwarders, Australia Post, and the sea freight people. They should be responsible for collecting the money, as we are in the retail business, on behalf of the government. Why should the government miss out on collecting $2.5 billion worth of tax at a minimum, and at this rate, they're going to have to raise other taxes in other areas when they should be collecting the tax on this?
Solomon Lew, thank you very much for joining us on Late Line Business.
Good, thank you, Tiki.